Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot, welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host at Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week we have a great conversation with Ted Metellus, the race director of the TCS New York City Marathon. That means he's got to get 50,000 runners from midtown Manhattan to the starting line out on Staten Island and then back through the five boroughs to Manhattan, to Central Park again. Just thinking about it makes me tired.
Yeah, it's really quite unbelievable achievement, and I've been close to it, and I marvel at it every year, all those millions of moving parts. But it's hard to imagine, Amby, anyone who could be more suited to the job than Ted. He was born and raised in the city, and he first worked for the New York Roadrunners way back in 2001. And after that, he had a number of top race management positions with other companies before returning to the New York Roadrunners in 2019. He's also run the New York City Marathon twice, clearly in the middle of the pack.
But before we talk with Ted, we'd like to review some of the biggest recent running news out there. George, what do you think?
Well, it's hard to find anything bigger than the Chicago Marathon results. Kenya's John Career ran a sensational second 13.1 miles to win overall in 2:02:44. That's the second fastest winning time in Chicago history, behind Kelvin Kiptum's world record of 2 hours and 35 seconds last year, but ahead of the great Kenenisa Bekele's third in Chicago. But of course, Amby, no one's talking about John Career. Everyone's talking about Ruth Chepngetich because she ran, get this, an astounding, and even all these days later, I'm still not wrapping my hands around it, 2:09:56. It's just a wonderment. That performance, I think, as much as any track and field or marathon performance that I've ever remembered. And you really dived into this and went a good bit further.
That's true, George. I wrote an editorial that was quite widely followed by internet running fans. Some agreed with my skepticism over 2:09:56, and some of them, of course, disagreed with me, and that's fair enough. My rule in running statistics is this: the numbers don't lie. If someone runs too fast versus their own personal career arc, and also against all the other runners in the world, then we should run a red alarm flag up the flagpole and take a hard look. And that's definitely the case with a 2:09:56. I hasten to add that Ruth Chepngetich has never failed a doping test, and I doubt very much that she failed whatever tests they would have administered in Chicago. But we all know now that there have been far too many doping busts in Kenya in recent years. In fact, the Kenyan government just cut its anti-doping funds by 90%. That means it's a wild west out there. Lastly, I've got to say that I'm disappointed. I don't think the World Marathon Majors tells us enough about its anti-doping processes and policies. That's a bad look, especially now. They should be much more upfront and transparent. There have actually been quite a few winners of World Marathon Major races who were banned for doping offenses a few years after their big wins. Maybe they weren't doping when they won the World Marathon race, but maybe they were. The problem is, we just don't know. No one's telling us. And I think World Marathon Majors should do more to get out in front of this problem. And that's the really big recent running news in the running world. Now let's turn to Ted Metellus, this week's guest at Running State of the Sport. Ted is race director of the upcoming New York City Marathon on November 3rd. It's a position he's held since 2021. We want to make sure we distinguish this from Rob Simmelcare, who we talked to a year ago on this podcast. Rob is the CEO of the entire New York Roadrunners organization, and he just ran a personal best 3:27 marathon in Berlin. So congratulations to Rob. Ted is the guy who has to handle all those race day logistics. He's the race director out in Fort Wadsworth, along the course, on the bridges, through the boroughs, and into the finish at Central Park. To me, it's a huge, almost incomprehensible job. Ted, I don't know how you do it, but welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Amby. Thank you, George. Truly an honor to be on the pod with you. We had a little pre-pod chat, and I was telling you how cool this is. I've read my fair share of Runner's World magazines and your articles and your stories. And George and I have known each other since '01. Back when I was a lowly event manager at Roadrunners at 9 East 89th Street. And I've always been in the same space, but here we are now as colleagues and friends, and really excited about this upcoming chat.
So, Ted, this is George, of course. It's great to have you. And we'd like to begin by asking you for a brief bio, how old you are, where you're living, what's your family situation, and what you do to fill up the hours of the day when you're not running the New York City Marathon and all those other almost 50 events a year.
Well, George, I'm a native New Yorker, Ted Metellus, youngest of four, Jacqueline, Paul, Pierre, my siblings, first generation, born here in the United States. My family is from Haiti. Everybody came here in the 70s, just before I was born. So I'll give you a hint where my age is. I've been with Roadrunners now back again since 2018 as the Senior Vice President of Events and Race Director sitting right now. And as far as what my family situation is, I don't have kids. I'm not married. I would say I'm married to the job to some degree. Have loving people in my life that are my foundation and my support in a number of ways, a tremendous partner and my siblings and everyone else. And I'm grateful for them, some of the best friends in the world. And as far as what occupies my time, I mean, one would diagnose me a little bit as a workaholic. Some maybe would call me a raceaholic as far as running and racing and events. But I genuinely love what I do and who I do it with. When I'm off the clock, music, concerts, shows, huge fan of travel. George, you and I have talked about various travels to beautiful places. I'm a fan of beaches. I'm a fan of history. Love going to Europe. Love going and exploring different parts of the world. And fortunately, the job aligns me an opportunity to get some exploring in and getting some run-ins as well. I've done 44 half marathons and I'm still going. So I get out there and run and move my body and hang out with the people.
Ted, sorry to hear you were the youngest in the family. You must have gotten beaten up all the time.
But you should see my siblings. I tower over them all. So I was a giant monster baby. So I didn't get messed with my siblings too much, and I still don't to this day. But I love them, and they're good for me, and I am who I am because of them.
Well, I can tell from that response that that's really heartfelt among all of you in the family. So last week you told us you were going to the Chicago Marathon, and I thought, great, Ted's going to be out there running or watching world records or something like that. Turns out you didn't exactly. So tell us what you did in Chicago and what you did after Chicago.
So you got the scoop there. So I was at the Bank of America Chicago Marathon with Carrie Pinkowski and the team there from Chicago Event Management. By the way, amazing podcast. I listened to it and loved it. And Carrie is awesome. He's such a great and gifted member of the team here at the World Marathon Majors. But I had the opportunity to head out there, and the plan was to hit the ground on Thursday, head to the expo, meet with some of our partners in New Balance and some of the other colleagues and friends in the industry. So I was basically living in meetings while I was out there, but reconnecting and connecting with colleagues and friends on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Saturday afternoon, I jumped on a plane, flew back to New York, and was on the ground Saturday night for early Sunday morning at the Staten Island Half Marathon and New York Roadrunners produced, the 37th year of us producing that event there in beautiful Staten Island. Great half marathon. We had about 10,000 athletes that were out there. We had about 150 or so kids that were running around in the stadium. It was a beautiful, beautiful Sunday here in New York. But what was really funny, while my mind and my body were in Staten Island, my heart was in Chicago, thinking about my colleagues and my friends that were there, carrying the team, obviously producing that event. And then to turn around and another world record's broken. I was there last year in the lead. Oddly enough, I was in the women's lead press truck last year when we got the word of the world record being broken. And it wasn't until we pulled into mile 26 and we pulled off to the side where a colleague of ours turned to us and said, the world record was just broken. This was last year. And we all looked at each other bewildered, like, wait, what? What did you just say? It's like, they just broke the world, like as deadpan as in today is Monday. He was like, the world record was just broken. And everyone was just like, so obviously in this day and age, we all break out our phones and we're all looking to see what's the deal. Granted, we're only, 200 or so meters away from the finish line, which would ultimately make our way to. But then we hear this inciting news of the world record being broken. And I know later in the pod we'll chat, but there's a little bit of a friendly rivalry in the World Marathon Majors. Kerry kind of hinted upon it on the last pod between Chicago and Berlin. And it was epic. And that finish was by far one of the most amazing finishes I've seen. I think the only finish that rivals this, and George and Amber, you'll both appreciate this, is Rod Dixon's finish.
Oh, yeah, Jeff Smith.
Exactly. Jeff Smith crashing to the ground and Rod Dixon's arms in the air. And, on the technical and logistics side, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Rod and talking to him and telling him, and he knows this, and we all know this on the pod, hands down, one of the most technically sound races ever ran. Running every tangent, watching every step. He ran an incredibly efficient race and crossed that finish line for what was an epic finish. Well, fast forward to last year's Bank of America Chicago Marathon, when Kelvin Kipton crushes through the finish line tape, runs into the arms of Kerry Pinkowski for one of the greatest embraces ever. I, in life, would love to have somebody embrace me the way that Kerry embraced Kelvin when he crossed the finish line with such pride and adulation and joy. And the energy was just tremendous. So I'm sad I missed this year, but I'm happy to see another world record being broken. Happy to see that it happened here in the States and along with our partners here at World Marathon Majors.
Pretty mind-boggling. 2:09:57. What do you make of that, Ted?
I'm still processing it, and what ultimately happened. Now, granted, this is super duper fresh, and fortunately, like the team at Abbott World Marathon Majors broke down a split count of like what her splits were. And what I'll end up doing either tonight or tomorrow is watching some videos that really do a dissecting of the athlete's experience. Now, while my colleagues are incredibly proficient in the recruitment of athletes, their times and everything else, and that's something that I am learning in this role. So it's great to say that you could still learn things in 50 plus years old. My specialty is logistics and operations. That's where I hang my hat. But it is amazing to learn the technical components of it and how it lines up with other athletes when you're talking about the 5K split, the 10K split, the half marathon split, and keeping a sustained pace and or negative splits. And Chicago, as you all know, and it was mentioned on your last podcast, they have pacers on that course. So the logistics that are tied into that and how that plays into it and how far the athlete is able to maintain and sustain that pace and that time sans pacers is also something interesting. So I know that's a bit of a mouthful there, but needless to say, I'm super excited to do some more research and hear about it and see about it firsthand and ask the question of what's next.
So let me ask you, Ted, you went to Chicago. How many marathons and other big road races do you try to get to each year? And when you go, do they put you to work? Or are you observing and just taking notes, things you can, fine tune here in New York? What is that for you?
Well, the short answer is yes to all of the questions. So I am of service to my colleagues and friends. We have meetings with the other race directors of the Abbott World Marathon Majors. We connect and share best practices and conversation. Also in note, like we'll be very focused in on very particular things that we'll look at. A lot of meetings with partners, athletes, agents, one of my favorite things to do is just meet with our runners, because there's runners from all over the world that run our races here in New York, as well as others. So reconnecting and connecting with them. So that usually consumes my time. Sometimes I'll get out and run some races. George, a couple of years ago, you saw me as I finished running the BAA 5K, which is one of my favorite races to run. So I'll get out there and hammer that hammer in light terms, but get out there and run that. And it's a fun one. But yes, sharing and looking at operational enhancements, logistical components, the experience piece, which I think that is now the special sauce to our industry, is the experience. So we could chat about that in a little bit, but how we all compare and line up to one another and ultimately continue to elevate our sport and our industry.
Hey, Ted, I'm going to put you on the spot, I think, for a moment. Since you're going to all these races and meetings and observing everything, could you tell us something that you saw somewhere else in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years that you thought was pretty cool and you brought back to New York?
Yes. So there are two things. One that we are going to do in New York, and one that I'm hoping for us to get off the ground. Dare I even say two things that we're bringing to New York? Now I could kind of give you a little scoop 20 days out from the marathon upon this taping, and one that's a future consideration. So one new thing that we'll have for this year's marathon, and George, it may not be that new because you know some of the things that we've done in the past here, but we're going to have a marathon party. We're going to have a runner's party Sunday night. We have a venue that and information has been posted and shared for folks to come out. And that is a cool thing to bring back from many, many, many years ago that we used to do this, and haven't done anything like this in quite some time. The Berlin team, the BMW Berlin Marathon, do an amazing athletes party, which is open for all the runners. Show your bib, show your medal, come in, have a good time party. They bring their pro athletes over. They, do some messaging and some storytelling there. But it's most importantly an opportunity for athletes to celebrate. So we'll be doing a very similar thing here in New York. So that's one new component that's there. Another one, which is a little bit on the technical side, is regarding the awards program. So for years, our awards program is on the physical finish line itself. So field of play is what we term that. And we will have all the athletes line up and everything's going on while the race is still in progress. So we still have, many of our seated athletes and local competitive and whatnot, our faster athletes still flowing through as we are getting the program set for the awards. That's always a tough one for me because my head's on a swivel. So what does that mean? I'm paying attention to our top athletes and acknowledging them and celebrating them in their wins, but I'm also looking at our athletes making their way to the finish line and making sure that they have the necessary care and attention needed as they've just completed their 26.2 miles. So after a couple of years of really looking and assessing it, looking at what TCS London Marathon does, looking at what's done in Berlin, those two events have taken the awards program off the field of play and set it off to the side, where it's still engaged by the public at large, still, shown on the screens there, still where the runners can run past, but not on the finish line itself. So those are just two quick things that are in play for this year. And one thing that we're looking at in the future is something that the team in Boston does that I love so much, which is a fan fest. I mean, why not bring the race experience to the ground? So yes, you have the expo, which is open to the public, and all types of programs and activities that are happening throughout the city that brands and partners are doing. But the Fan Fest, I think, would be a particularly cool opportunity to educate and inform the public at large, tell a little bit more of the story of what the race will be, and have a viewing party on race day for folks to come by and check out and see, where the finish line can only accommodate but so much. But the Fan Fest would be a cool thing to have, where folks can see their loved ones as they cross, and then maybe their loved ones can come and join them at the Fan Fest area.
I love that sort of experience as the special sauce comment. And I guess, the post-race party and, all of these things. I think you're right in expanding this beyond just the foot race and turning it into, a major New York event in every way. I think it's
absolutely.
It's just spectacular. So let me ask you, when you and these other Abbott Marathon, World Marathon major race directors get together, you guys sit down, you have dinner, you drink a few beers and so on. And What do you talk about? These kinds of things? What's your shop talk, basically?
What we chat about a lot, which is really interesting, George, and you'll find value in this. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about lately has been city politics, and the changes in the local political climate, the local city agency partnership and engagement. Learning and sharing with them has been a really big piece. One of the things that I think has been really amazing to hear these stories of city agency partners coming to the other marathons to observe how their counterparts manage, handle, and support the marathon in these major markets. And, I've heard stories of, the mayor of Tokyo coming to Berlin to see their marathon, seeing, partners from New York go up to Boston or to Chicago to see their marathons. So we've been talking a lot about those things there. Parks relationships, DOT relationships, MTA relationships, city agency partnerships. A lot of those conversations have been had as we're sitting down, having a seltzer water with lime or something a little bit stronger.
Ted, listening to everything you're doing already and planning is making me definitely not want to apply for your job. So you're safe for a while. Listen, you mentioned earlier in the family background that your family's from Haiti. Our
Yes.
listeners can't see you, but you are a Black man born and living in New York. And diversity has been a really big issue in all running organizations in the last 5-10 years. What's going on in New York with staff diversity, organizational, trying to attract new people to the sport? I imagine that's pretty important stuff to you.
100%. I mean, it's opportunity, it's representation. Those two things hold hand in hand, and identifying the talent necessary to show and represent the people that we serve. That's a key piece there. And it's been beautiful to see not only at New York Roadrunners, the growth of diversity in our organization, but also recognizing the history of it as well. I mean, when you think about Ted Corbett, also an African-American man, made his residency in the Bronx, similar to myself, but the history and legacy of him as an African-American male, the first president of New York Roadrunners, those learning about that and the significance of what people of color have had with the organization, on top of continuing to be, inclusive, engaged, diverse, and creating opportunities for representation has all been key at the organization. It's also been displayed firsthand in our running community. I mean, to see the number of clubs and crews that are coming out that are of diverse backgrounds representing BIPOC running communities have been amazing. And when you see those members of the communities at the other majors or other road races and events, the excitement, the engagement, the connection, the camaraderie is amazing.
So, Ted, going back, a lot of those early race directors that I can recall were kind of technical detail geeks, you might say. Here you are, a really charismatic personality. And what is it? And I ask you this, and I know you, so I know you're a modest guy, but I'm going to ask you to try to give us an answer nonetheless. What makes you the right guy to be the New York City Marathon race director at this particular point in time?
Oh, wow. That's a great question, one of which I've not had before, particularly posed that way. So well done, George. So I think I'm a student of the sport, the student of the industry. Growing up in this organization, there I may even say, is something that's key there. I remember chatting to Mary Wittenberg, our former race director and CEO, when I got the position as race director back in 2021. She stopped and said, "Ted, you're one of the last connections to the old club." I have worked I didn't work for Fred LeBeau. He had since passed prior to me coming on board with the organization in 2001, but I worked for Alan Seinfeld. I worked for Mary Wittenberg. I worked for Peter Chacha. I worked for Jim Heim. So I've worked for 4 out of the 5 previous race directors of the marathon and have watched the organization grow in a number of ways. I've run the marathon twice. I ran it in 2008 and I ran it in 2013 and got to see the race firsthand as a participant grow and the change of it there. there is no job that I have not done while working at the organization. I've been an event manager. I worked the start, the course, the finish. I've worked various capacities there. I left, worked a bunch of different events, big and small, all over the world, and then came back home to New York. I always am humble to the opportunity that I have. I never woke up every single day saying I want to be a race director. Like, I never was gunning for that position. I just wanted to do my job. I want to enjoy what I do with the people I get to do it with. I want to create these incredible experiences. And while, I'm a charming and charismatic guy, George, I'm still a little bit of a technical nerd when it comes down to the logistical components. And I love teaching the young people. I love being able to show them the technical nuances of things that they may have not learned yet, and maybe I have that opportunity to teach them. So it's been an incredible ride. I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and most of all, I still love very, very much what I do.
Ted, I always say, thank goodness for geeks, because where would everybody else be without them? So we're glad for that piece of your personality and background. So there have been a number of big marathons this year with over 50,000 finishers. And I think Berlin is now claiming the world record at a little bit more than 54,000 finishers. What kind of size are we looking at New York this year? Is size important to anyone? And by the way, what keeps the size? What's the limit on the size? Why can't it be bigger? Is it bridges, streets, staging area? Why can't we have 100,000 runners?
Oh my goodness. So lots to answer there and unpack.
Yes.
So watching the growth of running across the board now, George and I have chatted about this a bunch. So George's going to lean in on this one, Amby, but it's been really interesting to see what's been happening in the industry over the last 5+ years, and watching the industry change and grow over the last, dare I say, 15 to 20 years. So why do I say what I say? Once upon a time, it was race production, zeroed in exclusively on what's going on the course, the design of the route, the elements that are there, making sure you had the needs and services of the runners at core, which are still there, but that was it. Then it went from race production to event production, and event production started tying in with clients and partners and really engaging the public at large and having more people see it. Plus, the transition of runners that are going to be out there for a little longer than 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 hours, President Company included in that space. So that has opened up the diversity of the runners that are there. But then also now it's gone into, as I said before, the experience component. And so those have all linked themselves to watching the industry, the sport, and the activity really, really grow. It's amazing to see these amazing numbers. I mean, every race that had the capacity to grow did grow. So, specifically in the Apple World Marathon Majors. So, Boston has a fixed number. They can only accommodate but so much because of the nature of their logistics, their course, and their footprint that they work with. Tokyo is in a very similar situation, but what we have seen is that Tokyo has started to accept more international athletes in an adjustment there. So more folks are being able to experience the Tokyo experience firsthand. And then we saw great numbers in London, great numbers in Berlin, and yes, Paris having really, really strong numbers as well. So more people are running, more people are getting engaged. And to answer the question on growth, size matters, with a question mark at the end of it. It is important, but you don't ever want to take away from the essence of the experience. It's got to be quality over quantity, and you always want to keep that, first and foremost. Our race has the capability to grow over time, and we want to do so in a very careful and strategic way. The last time we had a large marathon was in 2019. We had 53,600 plus runners that year. That made us the largest marathon in the world. And that was with 4 waves. We now have 5 waves coming out of 2021. And how we match those numbers will be able to support the event growing over the years. So 2019, we had 53.6. 2020, we had no race. 2021, we had 25,000 because we came back at half capacity navigating COVID. 2022, we're at 47,000. 2023, we're at 51,000 and change. So we have the ability to at least match what we did in 19 with great potential in the future.
So Ted, we're talking a lot about the world marathon majors, and there's certainly talk about the possibility of a seventh marathon major. There have been, rumors out there, sometimes on social media, that the next one might be Sydney. Sometimes there's been some recent talk about even Shanghai. What can you share? What's going on, and what's your view about the whole thing?
So Sydney, Cape Town, and Shanghai are all candidate races. They are all in the running. So there's no rumors there. That's all fact. And there are parameters these events need to pass 2 years consecutively to then transition over into becoming a World Marathon major. We haven't had another major in quite some time. The last event was Tokyo. And they, went about a very strict criteria that all the races still go through now. And the upcoming events will have to follow in those similar paths. So it's interesting, it's showing again to my earlier statement, the growth of running, the growth of the sport, the growth of the experience and getting people out there and being a part of it. Sometimes you need an excuse to go to a place or do a thing. And maybe that excuse is running a marathon and going to a different country or a different continent to experience that. So it's been really amazing to see on that level. Sydney just had their event not long ago. So they'll be, they're currently going through the assessment process. The Cape Town race is this Sunday. I'm actually going to Cape Town.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so I'm going to head out there Wednesday night, get there Thursday night. It's a 20-hour flight. But I'll be there to observe and monitor. There is an assessment team. I am not a part of the assessment team, but I am there to just observe and be of service there and see what they're doing firsthand. I'll be out there along with my dear friend Jack Fleming from the BAA and the Boston Marathon. So he'll be there as well to monitor and see that. The other race directors have gone to some of the events to see them firsthand and give some feedback on their sides there. So, I mean, it wouldn't be the World Marathon Majors if it was just 3 in North America and 2 in Europe and 1 in Asia. So expanding the footprint there is something that is key. It never, ever will lose the essence of the original 6, So the 6-star journey is still the 6-star journey. That 6-star medal is still there. Folks that are on that journey should continue to pursue it. But what's amazing is how we're able to open it up to additional events and how that will be engaged, supported, and participated by runners.
Hey, Ted, I'm not going to spill the beans about your PR in the marathon, but let's just say that you haven't cracked the 5-hour barrier quite yet. So that gives you, that means you are a midpack runner and you know what it's like back there long after the TV cameras have gone away and everything else. Well, why is that important? And what do you learn? And what does the marathon have to be doing to be sure it's treating those people well and not just the 207 people?
Well, that's a great question. It ties back to what I stated earlier today, earlier on our pod here when we were saying about the diversity of our sport and the engagement of our sport and the demystification of the fact that you can get out there and do it. At the end of the day, New York Road Runners really prides itself on health and wellness, the transformative power of running. And we want as many people healthy, moving, and active as possible. And if we can contribute to that with having events that can, allow athletes till about 10 p.m. to finish, then we'll do that. And with the partnership of the city and our city agencies, and of course, the support of our incredible staff and volunteers, we create that experience. But yeah, I'm a mid-pack runner, I'm not out there for a fast time. I'm out there for a good time, but I am training, I am preparing, I am running, I am enjoying the experience just as much as somebody that is getting done in 2.5 hours. I'm probably getting the most money's worth out of the experience since it's taken me a bit longer than the average runner. But it's been really beautiful to see that. And then there becomes almost a competition with yourself where you say, okay, I just ran this race at this time. What do I need to do to train? What do I need to do to get myself stronger and better to get faster? The other thing, too, that I've said to many, many people who are that are venturing into the marathon space for the very first time, not as a traditional runner or an athlete in that space, I tell them to join a running community. Get connected with a club, get connected with a crew, get connected with a bunch of people that are going to be running at an equal pace as that you will be running in. It will significantly change your experience, not only on the training side, because it has somebody that's going to keep you committed to the preparation and showing up and executing, but on race day, you'll have somebody that's rolling with you and running with you and staying with you and keeping you accountable and going for 26.2 miles. My second marathon, I ran with friends, and it was the single greatest experience ever because I went with people who I trained with year round to get myself ready for it. And we all crossed the finish line together with the biggest smiles and felt so, so good.
So, Ted, you've got a full menu of races year round, and you're directing, gosh, no, I don't know, you'll tell us how many. But tell us about one that you particularly like, you think is very special, that's sort of, great fun in some way on that calendar of events that you oversee.
Oh, wow.
He doesn't have 50,000 runners.
Well, the marathon, it's the crown jewel. Like, that is the greatest day, the best day here at Roadrunners and in New York. But George, I mean, you asked a really good question once again, where, it's hard to single one event out because each event has its unique elements and components to it. The New Balance Fifth Avenue Mile is so, so special. And I know it's a favorite of yours as well, George, because it really and truly shows what New York Road Runners is all about when you're thinking about youth as young as 2-year-olds to seniors that are out there in the 80s and 90s hammering a mile. And then some of the best runners in the world that are there participating. I think one year, maybe next year, depending on how it works out, I might actually get out there and run with my age group.
Okay.
My colleague Christine Burke has inspired me because she got out there and ran her age group as well. But it's one of the greatest days and one of my favorite races, hands down. And I'd be remiss if I did not give an extra special shout out to a couple of really special races to me. First one is the Washington Heights race, Salsa Blues, the old Coogan's run, as we used to call it back in the day. Yeah. Love that race. That's a neighborhood race for me. I was born, while I was born and raised in the Bronx, and I'll get to that in a second. I live in the Washington Heights area. And I love that race. I love it so much. It's a race that I've run. Obviously, I've worked it for many, many years. The history of that race is incredible. Back in the days, we'd roll into Coogan's and hang out there and have a good time. And it's such a fun race where people see it and say to themselves, you know what, next year I want to get out there and do this 5K. I want to get out there and hammer it. Another one that I love so much is the Percy Sutton Harlem 5K. Again, great distance, great race, uptown in Harlem, in partnership with the Greater Harlem Chamber of Commerce, really amazing race that happens in the summertime. And both of those races, again, really signal similar to the New Balance Fifth Avenue Mile. We have our Rising New York Road Runners seniors, we have all our age group runners that are out there, and we have our striders and walkers that are out there as well. So truly encompassing everything that we do at New York Road Runners. And then last but not least, another race that's the closest to my heart is the New Balance Bronx 10 miler. As a Bronx native that went to high school a block away from where the start is, that lives by the course itself where it ran by. And when my mother was still alive, would come out to the course and cheer the runners on in hopes to see me when I ran it back in the day. So, I've taken the team out there and I was like, I went to elementary school there. I went to high school over here. My brother went to high school there. My sister went to school over here. I remember running through Marshallou Park and all of these things as you're telling a little bit of a story of the Bronx and a little bit of a story of Roadrunners, where we were all founded at at McCombs Dam Park. And, a little bit of story of like why this race is special to me and to so many people that call the Bronx home.
And finishes in the shadow of Yankee Stadium.
That's right. Let's go Yanks, baby.
Ted, you seem to me the absolute epitome of a guy who was born to the job that he's now sitting in. You're so passionate about it. You believe in what you're doing so much. Tell me what you would like to hear the non-runners, the citizenry of New York City say after a weekend of New York City Marathon activities. How would you like them to react to the event?
I want them to be inspired. I want them to truly be inspired by what they just saw and saw not only the best of New York, but the best of the world. And when I say the best of the world, I'm not talking about the elite athletes that are crushing it out there and really, really setting a pace but it's the athletes that are coming in later and in the mid pack of the day to see all shapes and sizes and all abilities out there. I really want them to walk away from that truly inspired by what they saw, but also know that they contributed to those athletes finishing strong. Fuel them to the finish line. Excitement, energy, cheer them on, but ultimately be inspired.
Ted, you took over the job in 2021, so you came in at a challenging time, to say the least. The COVID pandemic, a lot of things going on in the city and in the world, and that really affected the New York Roadrunners. Races were closed down, obviously, with layoffs in the staff. It was a pretty rough time. And so talk a little bit about, first how tough it was, but conversely, how things are now booming. What is this? The second running boom, the third running boom? But and give us your view from, inside the bubble, really, as to why so many people are now really into running.
Oh, wow. So 21 was a really, really interesting time in our world in so many ways. 2020 in particular. COVID was the great equalizer. No matter who you are or what you were impacted to some capacity. Then when you line up the social awareness and the racial awareness of our country and our world, folks realize the struggle that many of us, people of color, go through and still go through in many ways. Helping to bring the marathon back in 21 was, looking back, probably the hardest thing I've ever done professionally in my life. It took everything to keep a team engaged, keep a team, inspired, keeping a team connected, and really never wavering in knowing that we can do this. I was talking to some of my colleagues who were really uneasy and really concerned, like, can we do this? Can we do this? Because we weren't at the full capacity staff-wise that we are right now, as George noted. And yes, we can. And they're like, what are you talking about? I was like, I remember back when I was working at the organization, or even when I first came on board in 01, post 9/11, the fact that the marathon happened, and it was oddly enough, 20 years to the date, we were able to do that with 8 people in the events department. 8. My team, I have 50 people on my team right now. And there were 8 of us that helped produce that marathon, again, with the support of tremendous staff in the organization, amazing volunteers and support staff that came on board. So when you're talking about an organization with such humble beginnings that did such incredible and great things were going to happen again. So helping to truly keep the team inspired and engaged was key and critical at that time. Whenever I think things are challenging now, I remember that and realize that we were able to do it and we did it together. To the second part of your question, George, about this running boom, I don't know if it's the second or the third. I would lean on you two to kind of give us some context, because George, I've read things, seen things. I have my marathon book here, and the 70s we saw it, the 80s we saw it. It was really cooking. Things kind of flattened out in the 90s. There was a little bit of a bubble dip in the 2000s. From a business perspective in particular, I saw that with the growth of running organizations across the country and across the world. For a short time, for about 5 years or so, I worked for a competitor group in the Rock Roll Marathon series and saw them balloon up to 28 plus races globally. So there was definitely a mini boom, if you may say, back in 06, 07, 08. But now it's different. And I think correlating it back to COVID, when people were not able to go in gyms and work out, I'm sure you guys have heard this before, the one way to stay active and healthy was be outside and moving, running, walking, doing those types of things. And it was a communal activity. So you were able to do so in a group and get out to the parks and so on and so forth. I mean, our former Parks Commissioner, Mitchell Silver, did an amazing thing by closing the parks to all vehicles. So people were able to run, walk, bike, and do what they need to in many of the city parks, including one in my neighborhood at Fort Tryon Park uptown. Like, that was amazing. And that helped in keeping people not only physically healthy, but emotionally and mentally healthy as well. So coming out of that, springboarding out of that, and the fact that so many people don't work in traditional work spaces anymore, whether it's a couple of days at home, a couple of days in the office, there is still a yearning for people to socialize, engage, and connect, and it can't be from a device. So run clubs, run crews, these types of organized get-togethers that folks are having that are aligned back to health and wellness are really contributing to more people running and learning. And it's our jobs as, race directors, operations people, marketing people in the race space to educate and inform people of what is out there to run and participate in. But more importantly, what is out there to participate in the races, but what is necessary and needed to be able to do so and enjoy it.
Ted, since this podcast is called Running State of the Sport, we ask that state of the sport question to everyone, so you know it's coming. From your view, and you're obviously an enthusiast and an optimist both, how's the state of the sport of running these days? What do you particularly like about it? And tell us if there isn't something that could be worked on and improved.
I think the state of the sport is at its best. Right now, it's peaking. I don't think it's peaking to the point that it doesn't continue to grow, but I think it's at an all-time high. Opportunities, I think that I really, really, really stress on is proper information. An informed participant is the best participant in any of the distances that you may go out there. I mean, there was this old furniture guy here in New York City called Sly Sims. And he used to have a line that says, an educated consumer is our best customer. And I love that line, and it's so true because the better prepared you are, both in the lead into these races and events, being better trained, the technology that's available to us now that did not exist before, the shoe technology, which is insane, where it's helping people in the recovery and bounce back, the data that's available, the ease and information that's available now that did not exist before. People have run coaches and race coaches that don't live in the same time zone as you, informing you on what's going on, giving you training recommendations and resources. That stuff did not exist before. So I think that there's a lot of information that's out there that folks are having that are making them better athletes, and people taking the time out to say, okay, what just happened in Chicago? How did that happen? And how does that line up with other races there? And what's its potential going forward? So the state of the sport is pretty incredible right now. Great things are happening in the space. And I think that our participants and people getting in the sport have the opportunity to be the most educated, the most informed, and the most engaged that they've ever been before.
Thank you, Ted. Before we let you go, we're going to give you our 3 fairy godmother wishes, and only 3. And they are, what would you wish for? And this can be really open-ended for the upcoming New York City Marathon. It can be for runners and marathoners in the world, anywhere, for people who aren't even running, for your own thoughts and well-being, you name it. 3 wishes that you've got.
Wow. All right. 3 big wishes that I have. First and foremost, for a safe and logistically sound marathon day. Yep. That's always paramount. So, we have a saying at the shop, knowns versus unknowns. You plan for the knowns, you prepare for the unknowns. So we want to make sure that we have all our T's crossed, all our I's dotted, and that the weather is on our side. That's a one variable we do not have control over. So having a cool, dry, safe day is my number 1 wish. Number 2, I wish that people continue to see the very best in one another, and seeing that in running events, seeing that in the marathon, both here and all over the world, will be that. Sorry to wave that flag, but you see the best in humanity on race day. Complete strangers cheering people on, supporting you, showing love, making sure that you're okay. How many times I've seen people say, are you all right? Are you okay? If you're walking or whatnot, or slowing down. That you don't get that on a day-to-day, but you do on race day. So continuing to inspire the world would be number 2. And number 3, my gosh, I don't know. Peace on earth, baby.
Well, let's take that one for sure.
That's pretty much it. I mean, my attitude has always been, you want to be selfless. The energy you give is the energy you receive. And if it's all projected out in goodness, hopefully it'll come back. So a safe, great day. Inspiring the world, and peace is what I wish.
Ted, I'm going to tell you something now about the Berlin Marathon very quickly that you didn't know. And this is about people taking care of each other in the marathon. I fell at the 18-mile mark and hit my head and my elbow and hip, and I was bleeding kind of badly. I've never bled in a marathon before, but I bounced up. I was fine. And I tell you, within 2 seconds, there were a half dozen people around me helping me up, making sure I was okay, giving me cloth to sort of stanch the blood and whatnot until I got to a med tent, and they took care of me. The people in the marathon are the best, and they're one of the things that makes your job possible. Perhaps you can't take care of 50,000 people, but they take care of each other. And that's a huge benefit for everybody. So, folks, that wraps it up for our conversation today with the New York City Marathon race director, Ted Metellus. Ted, thank you so much for joining us today. It's not only been a pleasure, but you really told us a lot about yourself, your job, and what helps make the New York City Marathon run so smooth.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a total team effort. So if I was to dedicate this podcast to anyone, I would dedicate it to the incredible people that I get to work with day in and day out, the amazing events department, and everyone that surrounds it at New York Roadrunners. They are truly the magic makers. They are the ones that really bring it through, and they will see it firsthand in 20 days' time on November 3rd.
Amby, that was a terrific conversation with Ted Metellus. He's obviously doing a great job with the New York City Marathon. What struck you most about his comments?
George, I found that there were a couple of things that I really admired about Ted that came through in his comments. First, he's just a terrific communicator. And as an editor and writer myself, I think that's job number one for many running executives, and he does a great job. Second, he's more of a running geek and tech nerd than I realized, and I like that. I'm a fan of running nerds, and Ted just could not wait to get back and watch the Chicago Marathon video because he was really curious about how Ruth Chepngetich used her pacers to run that great 2:09:56. He happened to miss out on the live broadcast from Chicago because, oh yeah, he's got a job in New York. He had to be out on Staten Island for the Staten Island Half Marathon Sunday morning with more than 10,000 runners in it. I also enjoyed kidding Ted a little about his own running. He hasn't managed to crack the, shall we call it, the 5-hour marathon barrier yet, but that's a real positive for a race director, in my opinion. It means he understands what it's like to be one of the thousands of midpack runners out there in a marathon looking for their water stops and all of that stuff. Also, he clearly enjoys being in the midpack running with his people. So I think that's great. George, what did you think about Ted's comments?
Yeah, during our interview, you made the comment something like that Ted seemed to be born for this job, and boy did that come through in this interview. I just found a lovely blend of charisma and humility, and I liked the way he closed by sharing the credit that we were giving him really with his entire events team, and they perform miracles. It's true, but I think it's a real sign of Ted's leadership, the way he loves to share that credit.
George, I've been to quite a few New York City marathons, not as many as you, and I believe that every one of them is a miracle. I simply do not understand how they happen, but clearly it's people like Ted that are key to making it happen. And that's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward